Hey YouTube, Joeboy here. So, One Piece chapter 1053 is out. If you guys haven't checked out that chapter yet, I suggest that you do so because I will be spoiling you. Now that you have, let's begin. Man, this is like the perfect chapter to leave off with and then have a month-long break. This chapter was awesome. Not only for the reveals that were given, but how many different directions you can potentially take them, or just discussion points in general, which you guys know that I love. Like, for real, there isn't a lot of chapters that you could sit on for a month and be satisfied with it to provide enough discussion, but I think that this one is definitely one. I know this is relatively new territory for the vast majority of the community. I mean, it's been a really long time since Oda has taken a significant time off of, related to his circumstances. So I think that it helped here that he was able to plan this in advance. And I think that he knew that this chapter right here was perfect. It was like everything we could want to sit on for a really long time and just imagine the possibilities. I say this for a particular reason. I think that the impression was wrongly created. Now we know that it basically would end, or the break would begin when the new saga started. Now, how do you define when the new saga starts or not? I don't think that there's been anything in words, right? But it could simply be, and someone actually mentioned this to me ahead of time, that basically once we get the feast, right, then it's like a transition. I don't know if that's true or not, but we got the feast in this chapter, so maybe in Oda's mind or whatever, that marks the end. Or maybe that's just a fact and I don't know it. What I will say though, in retrospect, is the last saga was called the Versus Yonko saga. And now, those Yonko that we were up against have been defeated. Once you have the feast, it's kind of like, okay, the battle with those Yonko is over, so then the Versus Yonko saga, I guess, is over. So it kind of does make sense from that perspective that this chapter marks the change. However, the arc, as most people would typically define it, is not over, and that makes a world of difference. Or the simple answer to all of this is just we misinterpreted. It was poorly communicated and or impressions were created that were not intended. So, the saga isn't over, the arc isn't over. Oda's just beginning to plan for the next one. So yeah, to put the confusion aside here, it feels really good to just know that we didn't end this break with everything relating to Wano being over, or the Straw Hats essentially on their ship trying to leave. So I'm glad that that isn't the case. At the same time, where we left this chapter, it feels like we still have a few huge chapters left, specifically related to Wano. You guys know what I'm talking about, of course. Green Bull is really exciting. I want to know what happens there. And dun dun dun, Pluton. So yeah, let's just dive into this one. The chapter begins with the Marines and the Gorosei commenting on Luffy's bounty photo. I actually really like this. This isn't one of those things where it's just a creative direction Oda decided to go to give Straw Hat Luffy his gear 5th appearance, but it makes him, honestly, it makes him look like a god. If you remember, actually, from the very beginning of the story, things like devil fruits was an unconfirmed deal. It was a big deal. Some people considered it to be a myth. Even encountering a devil fruit was really weird. So to have a guy who looks like this on an actual bounty poster that's spreading across the world, I could see actual implications for that. In fact, I think that that is assuredly the case. Otherwise, the Gorosei wouldn't be freaking out. The world can't be allowed to see this. This leads directly into the bounty reveals. Luffy, Law, and Kid all have the same bounty of 3 billion berries. There's a lot of people that I've seen say that they don't like this. It doesn't make any sense. Luffy took down a Yonko almost solo. Certainly more so than Law and Kid, who double-teamed Big Mom, Giggity. And so it's like, why would he have the same bounty as them? It makes no sense. I think that Oda alluded to the answer to this question with the Gorosei's response to his bounty photo. I think that they're worried about the world rallying around Straw Hat Luffy or seeing him as something greater. The fact is that Luffy is the only one in the story who has taken down a Yonko. He did so solo. He is presumably stronger than both Law and Kid. Certainly stronger than the new Yonko Buggy, right? So the balance of powers is completely out of whack, and if the world knew that, then they might start to see Strat Luffy in a different light. Maybe we still have an encounter with Shanks, although Shanks is Luffy's mentor, so I guess the easiest way to explain this is I think that a case can already be made that Luffy is the king of the pirates, or at least he should already be seen that way based on his feats. Obviously Blackbeard's going to go through an arc and his hype level is going to raise, and so I imagine it's going to be Blackbeard versus Luffy. That's coming in the future, but as of this second, Luffy could be considered the strongest pirate by a significant margin. And I'm pretty sure that the world government, the Gorosei, and Imu do not want this to be the case. Hence, fake news. Fake news including equal bounties with people that Luffy has probably surpassed, at least in terms of his accomplishments. I really think that this is the world government's attempt to try and control the narrative, the perception of the top tier pirates. We talked about this in my recent bounty video, which was almost entirely wrong, right? But I made a point here that the way that bounties had worked in the past, every single time, is that once Luffy defeated an opponent with a bounty, if his bounty was lower than theirs, then after he defeated them, his bounty would become higher. This is a constant throughout the story. And therefore, it's a basis for assumption. If something is always the same way, then it's fair for people to assume that it will be true in this case as well. Kaido has a 4.6 billion berry bounty, Luffy defeats him, it should be higher than that. But you always have to remember that that is an assumption. It doesn't matter if everybody has the same assumption. It doesn't make it true or required. There's no actual reason why it has to be true because bounties are issued by the world government. If they have some reason to make that different or change that in any way, then you have intrigue. This is one of those things that really makes me laugh at people who hate theories, right? There's people that tell you, why are you even speculating? Or you have some sort of wild theory, and people feel like that they can laugh in your face. If you told people that Luffy was going to have a 3 billion berry bounty, or that he'd have the same bounty as Law and Kid, I think that a lot of those people, first off, a lot of people didn't see eye to eye with them there, and then second off, it's like, haha, why would you even speculate such a ridiculous thing? But it ended up being true, because Oda plays with these assumptions from time to time, and when or how he's going to change it, we don't know. Oftentimes I find people ridicule theories that they simply don't like, and it has nothing to do with how viable or plausible or not it is to happen in the story. Because in every case, I'm just going to go on a limb, in every case you're making some kind of assumption that Oda does not have to adhere to. One of the questions that we had was, how is Luffy going to get another bounty in the story after this one? There's some potential that he might not. Obviously with this bounty, I would expect that, yeah, he's gonna get another bounty eventually, before the epilogue, I hope. But we also talked about this in the bounty video, is from my perspective, the world government really had two realistic choices. Either, if it follows the trend that Luffy's bounty is going to be higher than the person that he defeats, he's going to have the highest bounty of anyone inside the pirate world. So whether it's 5 billion, 6 billion, 7 billion, 8 billion, doesn't matter, Luffy's being hyped through the stratosphere. So you might want to go all the way, if you're the world government, just to ensure that everybody takes a shot at him who possibly can. The other half of this is to de-hype Luffy, which is what we actually got. Essentially suppress everything that Luffy's done, or make it seem less than, so that you're not contributing to Luffy gaining power. Because if Luffy is truly the strongest and you make that out and you send these posters across the world where it's very clear, hey, Luffy has the highest bounty of anyone, he's the strongest, you're potentially helping him acquire new allies, or get help, or inspire the imaginations of children from across the world. They might begin to call Luffy king. With the way that Oda designed it here, Luffy still has competition. Even if we as fans don't necessarily see it that same way, in terms of the bounty and what Oda's playing with, it's the people of the One Piece world that matter. So we already mentioned this, but the balance of powers as it has been for presumably decades is totally shattered. Luffy is probably stronger than Law and Kid, but they're not Yonkos. But he's definitely stronger than Buggy, and Shanks was his mentor, so they're not adversaries. A thought the world government could have had is, okay, maybe it's likely that Blackbeard fights Luffy. You don't want the victor of that battle to become the Pirate King. So you create these circumstances. You manipulate the news to make it to where the winner of that battle isn't necessarily automatically the king, because you have, for instance, Buggy, who still exists as a potential Yonko, suppressing the existence of a king if the people buy it. Meanwhile, you hike your pants up and you get ready for a war or a great cleansing, because you know that this is a facade. It's no balance and it's going to break at any moment. All it would require is for like a Blackbeard, Shanks, or Luffy and Shanks combo plus his allies to just decide, hey, we're conquering the pirate world. Anybody who's considered on the same level as us is about to go down. But anyway, I think that this offers some cool insight about how Yonko are potentially selected. Someone like Buggy was selected over Kid and Law. You know, I think the main difference here is that Luffy as a Yonko and Buggy as a Yonko, they have a fleet. Potentially they have territory within the New World. I don't think that this is true. I know this isn't true for Law. I don't think that this is true for Kid. So perhaps that's the difference. If the government, if they had a fleet and if they had taken territory at some point in the journey beforehand, maybe the world government would have wanted to make Law and Kid Yonko. But as it stands, I mean, pirates don't individually exist in the New World without being conquered by Yonko. This is how it's always been. So your pool is very limited. Could I see Buggy having taken some territory from Big Mom or Kaido during this battle or sometime beforehand? Yeah, absolutely. I could see that. I kind of hope actually that Buggy, I mean, the world government has to know that Buggy is not individually that strong. However, because of the mystique, the hype behind all of it, he's got very powerful subordinates. He has a lot of notoriety. But at the same time, you know, hey, I could just send a member of Cypherpole to assassinate him, and it probably wouldn't be that difficult. So I'd like to see Buggy be a sort of world government pawn, that they may try to assist Buggy in defending his stake in the New World. I could just see Buggy rolling up at some point in time with the power of the government behind him, essentially like a new creation, a Yonko that is more similar to the Chichibukai, which is clearly not the case for any prior Yonko, like Whitebeard, Kaido, Big Mom, Shanks. Well, we're going to ignore Shanks. Blackbeard, all of these are individually very strong, and you can tell that they earned everything on their own and aren't subservient to the government. Buggy, on the other hand, is just like, hey, so you went ahead and made him a Yonko. Anyway, maybe that's the whole point. A Yonko that we can control. I could see Buggy showing up with SSG technology or introducing something related to the world government. That would be insanely hype to me. Or maybe the world government is just totally taking Buggy serious. Flashback to the reverie. Shanks visits the Gorosei, warns him about a particular pirate. Oda is troll enough. I'm just telling you, he's troll enough for Shanks to have been like, yo, you gotta watch out for this dude Buggy. But yeah, overall, I really enjoy all of this. Buggy being a Yonko, the bounties. It sets the stage for where we go next in a very surprising way, I feel like. I think that it would have been really easy for Oda to really hype Luffy, abolish the Yonko system, which may end up happening anyway, but have it happen sooner. And then we're just left sort of feeling like, okay, the story is really wrapping up. Now, that might be the case anyway, but this feels like the world government's last attempt to assert some amount of control before they just let loose. Which is, I don't know how to describe this, it's just a different vibe than I was expecting after Luffy and allies defeated 2 Yonko at the same time. If anything, this, I guess, justifies a little bit more the idea that a big fight with the world government is not going to immediately happen. I don't know if this take can be justified or not. It's my gut feeling, but if the Yonko system was abolished, I think that you would immediately see some big action from the government. The Great Cleansing, as they hint at. And there may be some elements of that as well, but it for me creates like a period of relative calm. Like, first, before we get into hell itself, we're gonna try to stabilize. So it potentially gives the Straw Hats an opportunity to find the last road poneglyph, potentially find Laugh Tale, before we get into all of that, which was some thoughts that people had originally. I had it as well, but it became unclear with the whatever happened to Sabo, the Revolutionary Army, everything from the Reverie, right? It felt so much more immediate. It's like, are we going to go back to the Red Line before the journey continues, or vice versa? I feel myself swaying even harder to Elbaf or some more adventure next. But anyway, let's continue following along the chapter. So the next thing that was really relevant is that Kid disappeared, and Appu tells us he had a funny look in his eye. And we can see later that he's big mad about Luffy being a Yonko, but not him, and he tries to fight Luffy. And it's turned into a joke. So I'm really wondering where we go from here. I feel like the answer we're supposed to come to, what Oda is hinting, is that Luffy is not going to seriously fight either Law or Kid. And although for some people that would be disappointing, it does feel very realistic at, right about now. I mean, I just don't think that Kid, especially by himself, is going to be able to defeat Luffy, and that we are really going to be invested in that fight for any significant amount of time. I had a theory from a long time ago that I thought was interesting, but delving into Kid's character, you can see that he has been trailing in Luffy's coattail, despite the fact that he was introduced with a higher bounty than Luffy when we first met him. From that point onwards, pretty much everything along Kid's journey has been failure. During the 2-year time skip where Luffy disappeared, and while doing so, his notoriety almost increased. Kid was actually out there fighting, actually surviving, which in and of itself is a feat. But the reward for all of this time, I mean, he's not insanely strong, right? Luffy came in just as strong as he was. He lost an arm to one of the Yonko, and he's not any more famous. Then we see Luffy return to the story, and he has an alliance with Trafalgar Law. Well, almost immediately after that, they read it in the news, maybe they were inspired, to also form their own alliance with Basil Hawkins, with Appu. The result of this was almost immediate betrayal, and then failure. While Luffy is still accumulating feats, Kid is rotting in Kaido's dungeon. And anything that wasn't failure, he didn't ever get proper credit for, like going into Big Mom's territory or attacking one of her ships, and then leaving or surviving in the New World and against all of these strong opponents for far longer than Luffy ever did. An argument can be made that Kid is as deserving or more deserving than Luffy for some tangible reward for all of his effort. But, and this is kind of a theme of the story that I think exists, but we'll see, is luck is a component of it. Luffy is kind of the chosen one, we know that, right? And Kid simply isn't. Given enough time, he could potentially be as strong as Luffy. An actual rival, that if they fought at some point in time, it would be an equal clash, but there's no chance that he will ever catch Luffy. Luffy will become the Pirate King, while Kid is an afterthought. That's how I see it. And I personally think reading all of Kid in the story since the New World, I think all of this is very frustrating to him, and something that hasn't necessarily been just straight up explained in the story. I think that from a kid's mindset, it would make sense to be just like, why is it him? Why is it never me? Why does he get all these nice things and not me? But as we already said, it just doesn't seem likely that a real fight, a true fight, will happen between the two characters. As Kid seems to be legitimately trying, Luffy turns it into a joke, and that's kind of how I see it for Kid in the story, even though many Kid fans who want to see more from him may not like this. The theory from a long time ago is essentially that Kid is treated like Bellamy, but in a very different way. One of the things that's lingering that we're all excited for is what happens with Nico Robin. We know that people are going to come after her, but who will it be? Will anybody be successful? It could make sense for someone like Kid to go after Nico Robin to try and one-up Luffy, but ultimately I think that he'll fail. Maybe some of you will think that this will be trash. It's a subjective opinion. I can see why people might say that, but for me, I could imagine Luffy one-shotting Kid. with a punch, if Kid tries to do anything too serious, if he doesn't stay in his lane. And we could see Kid potentially express some of these things that I've speculated, like the hopelessness or the jealousy that he might have for Luffy. So I really like this comparison with Bellamy, because Bellamy started off with like a kind of philosophical difference with Luffy. Bellamy was very narrow-minded. He didn't believe in the unbelievable. He didn't treasure the adventure, and Luffy never fought him for these reasons. And so in a similar but very different way, I think that Luffy has a lot to teach Kid, not about believing in the unbelievable, but in terms of, hey man, you just gotta step up and do stuff. One of the things that I've noticed about Kid is he can be very calculating, right? Much more so than Luffy. Luffy just goes headstrong into wherever his next destination might be. He faces whatever challenge might be there, no matter how crazy it might seem. It's very similar with Kid, where Kid didn't go into Big Mom's territory and pick a fight with Big Mom. He stayed on the outskirts. He attacked a Big Mom ship instead. And you can see how this is a much lesser version of what Luffy eventually did. And at the same time, Kid didn't get any credibility from what he did, whereas Luffy was considered the fifth Yonko. So I take this idea further. It's very similar to Bellamy and Luffy. Luffy's never gonna fight Kid if Kid essentially, gets mad at him for, like, I've done all these things and I don't get any credit for it, but you get all this credit and it's just lucky. I don't think Luffy would ever fight him for that reason, but it's things that Kid could potentially say. But if Kid ever threatened one of Luffy's crew, it could be a major flex moment for Luffy, where essentially the point of it is, this is why I'm where I'm at and why you are where you're at. And I think that there's more similarities as well. When it came to Bellamy, Bellamy flexed his really large bounty. My bounty is higher than Luffy's is. At the same time, Kid could have the same perspective. I'm just as strong as Luffy is. But obviously Bellamy didn't understand. And I think that Kid doesn't really understand either. So Luffy could make a point. But a huge difference between how I see these things is that the whole point of Luffy basically punched dreams into Bellamy, right? Like, that was that whole thing was about. In the case of Kid, Luffy wouldn't punch dreams into him. It would be to crush his dream. That would be the literal point. If Luffy managed to one-shot Kid, or anything even close to that, right? That is a heart-breaking, heart-wrenching moment for Kid, where I would totally expect him to cry. And that's something that we haven't really seen in the story, and I think that there's a place for that, a kind of acknowledgement of everybody else who has dreams, and how only one person is ever going to find Roger's treasure. And only one person of this generation is going to become king. You can question Law's motivation. Does Law really want to become the Pirate King? Does he really want to find the One Piece? Is he flexible in these kinds of things? But with Kid, it seems very honest and genuine. He's a real player. This is what he really wants, and he's not going to get it. And it's not for lack of trying. Again, I think that it could be a very poignant moment that Kaido was never able to crush Kid's will, but maybe Luffy could. But obviously, that is just a theory, a One Piece theory, which may or may not happen, right? But headcanon, okay, you got that. But anyway, to continue on the chapter, we then follow Nico Robin inside the poneglyph room as she's handling Kokeshi dolls. This leads to a Tenguyama Hitetsu Sukiyaki reveal. We'll talk about this a bit later. But the conclusion of this, Robin interjects his speech to say that Pluton is supposed to be here, and he says, indeed, it is. Coming back to this in just a moment, the chapter then pans to Green Bull, who is making his way to the Flower Capital, where everyone is. Meanwhile, he has killed Prisoner Mine and Udon. We see his powers, how he's able to suck the life literally out of people using roots. We see that as he's walking, plants are literally growing, which is exactly what we speculated last week. But it is clear that Green Bull is not an ally, because this dude looks up to Akainu. Honestly, I love the way that it was phrased from the story. Don't tell Sakazuki-san what I'm up to. Got it? See ya. Which is interesting, because by not telling Akainu what he's doing, there's a real chance that Green Bull might mess up. But yeah, let's pause for a second. Let's backtrack here. We all know, right, that there's a lot of possibility, that a lot of different things could happen, and I could sit here and I could list all those things, but I just kind of want to give you what my headcanon is for now. There's a really, really old theory about Pluton that I really like. That's in part wrong, but in part could be right as well, so I just like it. But the theory is that Pluton could be found buried underneath Alabasta. With the whole volcanic eruption thing, which hasn't amounted to anything, I'm expecting the borders to potentially open. It may or may not happen, I'm not too sure, but something's got to happen with the volcano. So, I don't know, it just makes sense to me. Like, Pluton is hidden somewhere in Wano. Will the volcano reveal it? I know what you're thinking, right? You're thinking, JB is basically saying they kept the Pluton, which is supposed to be a ship, they kept it in the magma below Onigashima. It's been surviving in magma this entire time. To which I say, yeah, I kind of do think that, to be honest with you. It's like, even the Thousand Sunny, I think the Thousand Sunny could take magma. No, not in the actual magma, but that it'll start, you'll get earthquakes and stuff like that, and you might see it buried somewhere. But yeah, I'm just trying to think about Wano. Is there any place where we've seen something that actually looks like a ship? Like you would typically define a ship, because that's the first place that I would look, and I can't think of anything. You can also consider like substandard ships. For instance, we talked about before the theory that Zunisha is Pluton, because Zunisha, even though it's a creature, also is a ship. That's the point of Zunisha. She walks on the water, carries the minks. It's an island ship. Obviously Zunisha's left, so I assume that that's not what Pluton is. But things like Onigashima has another name, so maybe. I tend to not think so, but, you know, who knows. But I'm just kind of expecting that Pluton is like some crazy facet. It's like part of Wano itself in some weird way. It's just a thought that I can't shake. And so when the island starts crumbling, it'll be like, Wano was Pluton or something. Does that make sense? Can you understand the words that are coming out of my mouth? And so the other half of the old Pluton theory that I really liked, even though parts of those theories are clearly wrong, parts of them could still be right, so let's just go off. The old theory about Pluton that I loved, one of the first videos I made on my channel, one of my favorite theories of all time, is essentially that the world government finds the Pluton, and the Thousand Sunny becomes a new version of the Pluton. Frankie memorized the blueprints in some way. This is a relatively popular theory nowadays, but back in the day, okay, this was like prime material, and I'm still a huge fan of this theory. So we got two things happening concurrently here, which intrigues me greatly. First off, we find that Pluton exists somewhere in Wano. It seems likely that it is about to be discovered. And then secondly, you have the introduction of Green Bull, who wishes to impress Akainu by taking out Luffy. No, by finding the Pluton. Finding something like that and then taking it away would eliminate the threat to Wano and to the Strats in the short term, so that you wouldn't have an all-out clash potentially with Green Bull. We could go on to the next arc and it would make sense, but it would still be hype and it wouldn't undermine Green Bull, the Admirals, or the Marines right now, which I think is important after all the dubs that the Straw Hats have been taking. And I know that we haven't touched on this yet, but this is a big facet of kind of what I'm hoping for. This is a hope. Many things could happen. This is my hope. I don't want Luffy and crew to wash Green Bull. I don't want them to embarrass him at this stage. I want to live in this moment of hype for this character. I want to see him do something awesome, which means that I hope that he just doesn't lose really quickly. But he's still a threat to the country of Wano, very clearly. The Strats can't leave while this dude remains here, right? So, brain, gears turning of how to get him the heck out without, and also without killing everybody. So this is a way it potentially works for me. If Green Bull in some way, in some form, discovers that an ancient weapon is here and he finds it, he could leave feeling good about himself. At the same time, we've talked about before with the Great Cleansing that the Gorosei and Imu talked about. Pluton is a ship that supposedly has the capability of destroying entire islands. So when you're talking about things that the world government could use as part of their force to initiate some sort of great cleansing, in my mind, something like having the Pluton always made a ton of sense, especially because it's an ancient weapon, right? So you expect that the Strats are going to have all of them. The headcanon exists that Frankie had the blueprints, he memorized them, and that the Thousand Sunny will become it. Another reason I really like this theory is because the Thousand Sunny is the Straw Hat ship, okay? Just imagine for a moment, this doesn't have to be the case, but imagine that Pluton is an actual ship. Strats are not going to be just dumping the Thousand Sunny and then choosing the Pluton for the in-game events. The Thousand Sunny is here till the end. So it would make more sense if it just becomes the ship of prophecy, basically. And then you can give this old one to an enemy. And this also lines up with what Frankie said about the blueprints. The blueprints weren't there to create the Pluton, it was the counter Pluton, in the case that the Pluton ever fell into the wrong hands, right? Well, Green Bull, Marines, get the Pluton, definition of falling into the wrong hands. So in an ocean of possibility, for now, this is my working headcanon. But another really fascinating aspect of all of this is the threats to Nico Robin, right? Everybody wants Nico Robin because she's the one person who can read the poneglyphs. We're also talking about discovering an ancient weapon. You know, Robin, ancient weapon, at the same time, these two things are thematically related. Well, while this is going on, while Robin is hyped up through the stratosphere, we get an introduction of another character in the story who can read the poneglyphs. I don't even know what to think about this. Sukiyaki reveal, what happens with him? Doesn't he just have to die? I mean, like, I say that with a laugh, but, you know, rip Sukiyaki if he just dies, but, you know, Robin is special, okay? So, it could just be that his identity remains secret for the end of the story. I could see that. But it's just really curious to me how we've been hyping Robin through the stratosphere, and then all of a sudden it's like, aha, not special anymore. Does this become anything? But yeah, before we move on, let's just talk a little bit more about Green Bull. Make sure that we give this character his due. He looks freaking awesome. His powers, I want to know if he can suck soul out through these trees. It could just be liquid because the people also seem dehydrated in a similar way as Crocodile, and it may just simply be that. But it also reminds me of when Big Mom uses her powers to suck soul out of people. And because the reason that I bring this up basically is because of all the theories of the past that essentially devil fruits come from trees. And we know from Caesar and from Smile that they take SAD, which I assume is like mixed with DNA or with souls. They pump it into the water, trees suck it up, and then it produces fruits. So now you have somebody who has a plant-related fruit. I just want to know if this is some kind of legendary devil fruit. Legendary in the sense that it has a lot of history and could potentially relate in some way to phenomenon that exists in the world, like the devil fruit tree. Maybe not exactly that because it is itself a devil fruit, but be a facet of that in some way. We talk about Elbaf should be soon. You have a giant tree. Could it be that this crazy tree exists because of crazy devil fruits like Green Bulls? Honestly, as we reach the end of the story, these are the kinds of things that I think Oda may or may not get into, but could add a lot of hype to the story, and just things that I want in general. I don't want them in Viva cards. I want to see all of these top tier fruits not only used in the present, but shown how they were used in the past, what role the fruits may or may not have played during the Void Century or the creation of the world. When we get to in-game sort of stuff, I assume that most of these fruits, if they aren't recently created, could have been important. And more than any of the Logias, this one in particular strikes me as something that could be like Law's fruit or like Luffy's fruit, just because plants are an important part of the world of One Piece itself. But yeah, one more thing to mention before we move on to expectations for the arc going forward, or Wano going forward. Last thing that caught my attention was we got a line at the very beginning of the chapter where a Marine soldier said, the photo on Luffy's bounty was sent by CP0's, a person from CP0, I'm not sure how to pronounce the name. And it's really interesting because the Gorosei freak out like, we can't see this, but the photo was sent by CP0. It reminds me that, and this was a detail that I forgot about, the leader of CP0 was not very pleased at the mission that he was tasked with to intervene in Kaido and Luffy's fight. He seemed really salty about that. So I don't know if this person is the leader or if it's the guy who ran away and survived. But as of lately in the story, CP0 is being fleshed out in an incredibly interesting way. Whereas before I thought that they were loyal to their core, perhaps evil, it doesn't seem that way. It seems like they're kind of at odds with their circumstances. They are loyal to the Celestial Dragons, the Gorosei, maybe Imu, but are doing things that they don't necessarily want to, and this seems like the first real overt act of rebellion. So I want to see where this goes. But yeah, this chapter was pretty much everything that I hoped for. From what we were given, resolution to lingering plot threads. We had a line from Big Mom that part of the One Piece, or an important secret was found in Wano. Now we know that Pluton is here. These are one of those hanging plot threads, things that we wanted resolved with Wano. Once again, Oda proves that if he wants it to, if the thing doesn't just become nothing, right, then it's almost guaranteed to land. And that was the whole chapter. And along with the time developed to these things, I wonder what other things we might get, like, for instance, the Sukiyaki reveal in this chapter I thought was incredible. Just a thing related to Wano that eventually I think had a really, really good payoff. Something that a lot of people wouldn't see as being necessary. I don't think that it was necessary, but it's just awesome. And it continues to tie off things from Wano. Honestly, this Sukiyaki reveal is of the caliber that I wanted for essentially everything, right? It's like we spent a long time speculating about the Kokeshi dolls, right? But it's a clever twist of logic where you think that the Kokeshi dolls are important, but they were never important, and they never needed to be explained, because all that was important is who collected them. Tengu Yama Hitetsu, right? He collected them, and then we know that the Kokeshi dolls can also be found in a poneglyph room in Wano. So you're not talking about the Kokeshi dolls being important, you're talking about the person who's associated with them and what that means. It's just insanely clever and satisfying. Although I heard that from anime watchers, they knew that the voice actor who played Tengu Yama Hitetsu was the same voice actor who played Sukiyaki, right? So, I mean, it's not always the case. Voice actors sometimes play many different roles, but that was a clue that they were the same person. So outside of the things that we pretty much know we're going to get, which is some confrontation with Green Bull, some maybe indication of what Pluton is, its location, maybe it's found, it doesn't have to be found, but it could be, or Robin reading the poneglyph in Wano itself that we can see to give us some clues as to what it's talking about, because the poneglyph that indicated Pluton's location was in Alabasta. So this poneglyph is new, so I expect to read it too. I mean, it's not a guarantee, but that would be in line with what I would know. And then, of course, some clue at least as to where Kaido's road poneglyph is. So some things that aren't necessarily needed to be covered, or Oda might not cover, but I would love to see. I think a lot of things related to Zoro, right? Zoro has some history tie with Wano from the village that he was raised in. He could possibly be ancestrally from Wano. And I think that we need some resolutions with some of the swords that Zoro used or had, including Ryuma's sword, Shusui, taken from him, heirloom of Wano, but he rightfully deserved it. We also have Enma. Is he going to keep Enma or give it back? These are things that I feel like are necessary for the sake of completeness. And as this last thing definitely feels necessary to me, you'll have time with Zoro and the story to potentially get into other things, such as some exposition from Zoro about seeing the Grim Reaper, what that means. Just expand upon that moment so that we understand it as something other than, a delusion. But going back to the things that I would definitely want or love to see, talk about a little bit more firm hints, at least, as to where Big Mom and the Big Mom Pirates are. We got something of a hint in this chapter, But man, it is very, very hard to decipher. I'd like something a little bit more concrete. You guys know I would love to see Kaido return alive. He doesn't have to fight anyone. He can be immediately killed by Green Bull, for instance, or, whatever. Something happens to him, but I would love for Kaido to return so that Yamato could potentially have a conversation with him. That is something that I feel like would add a lot to the story. Speaking of Yamato, why Yamato wants to be Oden, there could be things related to the journal here that Oda doesn't want to reveal, but I want some more Yamato before we leave, and with some more time that's possible. Also, before we leave, it feels like the right time, since we're in Wano and will soon be leaving Wano, to reveal what Onigashima's other name was and how that could potentially relate to the world or history in some way. That feels like a big moment on its own. Could Oda potentially get to it later? Yeah, but we're in Wano, so I don't see why you would want to rush through it unless this knowledge it's not yet time for it. Again, if Kaido just reappears for a little bit, this would be another perfect segue of things that Kaido would know. He chose to Onigashima to be his base for a reason, right? So for him to comment on that before he dies or as he dies would make a lot of sense to me. And of course, the final thing, this also relates somewhat to Big Mom and Kaido and could be a good segue into information about their whereabouts or what happened to them, is the volcanic activity in Wano is set up as something that was immediate and important, that could potentially have consequences. Something could happen, and then 7 days pass and we haven't heard about anything since. But that doesn't mean something can't happen, and I really hope something does. As of this second, it really does feel like we have at least 2 or 3 more chapters in Wano. At least. It could actually be more than that. I'm not going to place any bets. I'm tired of placing bets, quite honestly. But I like this feeling. I like the feeling that, hey, we got some time here to sit in Wano and do some more things. But yeah, obviously incredible chapter. I love where we're at right now. We still don't know where we're going to go from here. And it leaves open the possibility that anything can be revealed in the next few chapters to start shedding light on the direction going forward. That's probably the thing that I am most excited for the path to be unveiled. And the other thing is when is the Wano acts going to end? Are we going to get a 4th one? Because we still haven't reached the end of the 3rd one. Most people expect at least a 4th one that's short but still there. So this chapter didn't even end with the act ending. So yeah, that's pretty much what I have to say. As always, I'm curious as to what you guys think. Leave your thoughts in the comment section below. Like the video if you like the video, dislike the video if you dislike the video, subscribe if you want to be notified for my future content. And as always guys, have a wonderful day.